Now I'm very excited to welcome for the first time to this show, Mr. Rob Pizzola from Circles Off Podcast and BetStamp, as well as welcome back our fellow beer-loving Matt Landis from Props and Hop Show. You can follow them on Twitter at Rob Pizzola and MLandis18. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Been a fan of you guys for a very long time. Rob, finally got to meet you in person a couple weekends back. That was fantastic. How did the rest of your weekend go?
It was great. I had a great time at Circa. I think the hospitality there was excellent over the course of that weekend. Got to meet a lot of great people there as well. Love that sports book. Wish I could live there and be there every single day. What an experience that really was.
Man, I got to tell you, I'd be scared to live there every single day. But yeah, it's a wonderful place. And Derek put on just an amazing show for us all. Just the man is just absolutely high class. And a little humbling for me meeting some of the guys like yourself that I've looked up to for a very long time. So I just absolutely had a blast. Matt, we missed you there, man. I thought there's a chance you might just show up, but no go that weekend, my man.
I almost did pull the trigger at the last minute, had some major FOMO. I do plan to be at that particular Circa contest weekend annually moving forward. But you know what? Being in LA, I was able to just cry my way all the way to the beach and just use that as the alternative.
There you go. Just soak yourself in some IPAs and you'll be absolutely fine, man. No, that's cool. That's cool. We had a blast that weekend. The drive home to Arizona, though, it's like driving through Syria or like Afghanistan. So that last day from Vegas is a little bit rough. But
I'll trade you the flight home to Toronto. I mean, that one, it's another breed.
I'm sure it is, man. Customs probably, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's got to be fun. Well, hey, guys, real exciting, man. TheHammer.bet, brand new venture for you guys. I'm starting to see it pop up everywhere. What is it exactly? And I guess, who is it for? Who does it benefit?
Yeah, I think TheHammer.bet is essentially what we tried to build here is something that's all-inclusive to all types of bettors. So I consume a lot of content in the space, as does Matt. We both produce our own podcasts. And what we typically see in the space is that you're either going to have stuff that's geared towards a sharper type of bettor, or you're going to have very recreational content, but there's no one that's really bridging that gap really well. So what we wanted to do here was build a network where literally any type of sports bettor can go and find content that is suited to them. And they can also discover stuff that they typically wouldn't be filtered to them through their social feeds in the past. So that's sort of the idea behind the Hammer. We've been able to curate 50 plus creators just for football right now, have a lot more in the works for NBA, NHL, some other sports like tennis, MMA, so on and so forth. But that was the vision behind the Hammer, was just let's build something that every single type of sports bettor can get some value out of.
And if I may add to that, one other point that Rob, you've also spoken to very well previously, I think creating content that people can both trust and enjoy is a big emphasis. And one of the biggest things about the sports betting space, it's so much fun. I've had the chance to meet so many really brilliant minds and make some great friends along the way, even led to my career opportunity with the Hammer. But something we don't talk about enough is that almost every bettor who tries to win at this ends up losing in the long run. And that's not necessarily a problem. If people are betting responsibly, they're finding entertainment value, there's a sense of community, that's perfectly okay. And with the Hammer, what we're looking to do, tracking creators and shows via BetStamp, is making sure that transparency is there. There are some bettors who are creating content for us who are highly entertaining, and maybe they don't win long-term, and they don't hide that. And then we've got pros like Rob, Hitman, Fabian Summer, among others. And those are some really sharp minds. And whatever the case may be, we're trying to be honest with people, and hopefully they can trust and enjoy the content every step of the way.
That's what I love about BetStamp. It's such a great site, well put together. It's fast. I've seen a lot of other tracking sites, but that's really clunked up. But it's really fast. And you know what? We can admit if we're not a positive sports bettor, and there's bad seasons, there's good seasons. We can admit to that. That's fine. And I think the honesty is the biggest thing that's been missing in this industry, right? And places like BetStamp help curate that. And as well, you don't have to feel bad about it. You love sports, you watch sports. We're all just trying to improve that ourselves. And that's why I think this type of website for tracking yourself, just seeing what other people are doing, you're not going to feel so bad about yourself when you look at other records as well. Isn't that right, Rob?
For sure. I mean, we know from industry studies that 98 to 99% of people are losing sports bettors in the long run, and that's okay as long as the vast majority of those are just doing it for recreational purposes and it's not a problem gaming type of thing. Personally, what I see in the content space that really bugs me, and it was kind of part of the vision behind the Hammer, is I don't discriminate against content in the sports betting space. You can have sharp stuff, you can have recreational stuff. Different people who are consuming content are looking for different things. Some people want to educate themselves. Some people want picks. Some people just want to be part of a community. Some people are just looking for entertaining content where they can get a laugh. To me, it doesn't matter what the reason is. I just don't like when the content creator is misrepresenting themselves. So as part of what we're doing for this, like Matt mentioned, is we are tracking all the picks that are given out on shows. We are tracking the creators. And on top of that, we won't have a creator pass themselves off as something that they're not. If they're not a pro sports bettor, they're not going to tell people they're a pro sports bettor. If they're a losing sports bettor, they'll make light of that. They'll kind of make jokes about it and they'll let people know and be real with the audience. And I think that's extremely important in the content space.
Absolutely. And it's a great marriage with the Hammer bet because you guys got the odds there. You got the tracking, kind of the whole shebang. I love it. Who came up with the idea, Matt, of the Hammer bet? That sounds like something you would come up with.
I wish I could take credit for it. I'm probably going to have to pass this off to Rob because I was kind of approached out of left field with just a dream scenario to get on board here. But Rob, Johnny from BetStamp, among probably a couple others, had already gotten that idea in the works prior to my involvement.
This would really depend on who you ask. I think Johnny, who is one of the co-founders of BetStamp, my co-host on the Circles Off podcast, he would probably take credit for the idea. I would say that I had pitched this idea roughly 2 years ago and it never got off the ground, and he just happened to pitch it more recently. That's me, from my own perspective, but it was just like a thing that came together. Johnny basically pulled myself, Julian, one of the other co-founders of BetStamp together, said, hey, I think that this is a good idea. What do you guys think? Can we get this off the ground in 3 to 4 months? And we thought about it. We discussed it for literally an entire day and eventually decided that we were going to go with it. So I think it was a collective group effort, but definitely it was Johnny that brought it to the table or resurfaced it. Would have been in April or May of this year.
Wow, that's quick. And that thing's already up. Well, I guess the credit goes to Johnny for coming up with it. But Rob, great backing right there. Great advertising. You guys, I'm very excited because it's written. It's easy to read from what I'm trying to say. Trying to come up with the right words. When I pull up from a phone or when I look at it from a computer, the words are big. It makes me want to come back to the site. I think whoever was your site designer did a fantastic job, Matt.
Yeah, and Rob, again, on the co-founding team, that's probably Julian and his team, kind of making it look like almost a bit of a YouTube or a Netflix type of look, if you will. So while we are the Hammer Betting Network, it's not like a network with 24/7 live content. People can kind of come consume what they want on their own time. And we definitely tried to keep it as clean and easy to use as possible. So it's really encouraging to hear, Kip, from your experience that that's been the case so far.
Yeah, I can't believe it's up that fast. Go ahead, Rob.
When we actually started building the site, it was not what the final product looks like at all. We actually spent 2 to 3 weeks going in a completely different direction, building it up more like a traditional news site, something like The Athletic, but more of a sports betting spin to it. And as we started to navigate through, the beta that we had, we're just asking ourselves, do people really consume content this way anymore? And I think it was a resounding no. Especially the younger demographic is more used to being able to stream something whenever they want. So we definitely tried to replicate streaming services that are out there nowadays in terms of how things are laid out, how things look. I think we successfully accomplished that. But yeah, like Matt said, this isn't a 24/7 live network. It's one of those where whenever you have some free time, you can go check out some articles, you can go check out some videos. I laid in bed last night watching some videos on the Hammer as well. So it's just really easy to consume the content. I think it's well laid out.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great point. Generation Z, it's all about video and quickness. TikTok, right? Anything under like 3 minutes, after 3 minutes, it becomes long. So that's something I'm trying to, reform my old ways and jump into the new too. So great stuff there. Is there a membership level to this site where, say somebody wants some more advanced plays, earlier plays, anything like that, or any other types of content that you can digest from a membership perspective?
Everything is free to everyone, and everyone gets the same thing as every single other person on the site. So it was a goal of ours to make it as inclusive as possible. It's something that we really wanted. So It doesn't matter who you are. If you access the site, you're going to see the same thing as everyone else. Now, down the road, obviously, we're going to get into some recommendation engine type of stuff. As you consume more content, we will, tailor the content that you see to you. I think that's extremely important in products nowadays. But as it stands, when we do put out a piece of content, it gets distributed on the platform to every single person. I don't want to dictate who can see what, who can't see what, so on and so forth. That's not to say that it might not change down the road, but as it stands right now, everything that's out there is free to use and is accessible to everyone.
Wow, that's nice. What a great benefit to the public there. You can just see what all the sharper people are doing, get the articles right away and digest it as you please. Wonderful. And definitely love the algorithm perspective. Eventually you come into what I want to see. It's going to pop up on my front page. I think that's very important to this industry and for the changing of times. All right, guys. Well, great stuff. Can't wait to read TheHammer.bet every single time I get a chance. Check out all the great handicappers that you have on that site. What a wonderful venture you have going on. Let's get on to a little NFL. And this is overreaction week is what people like to call it. College kind of already had theirs, but there might be some underreaction too. So I want to ask you guys, starting out with you, Matt, do you see any games or any lines out there? Not saying that you want to bet them, but do you see any overreactions or underreactions?
I feel like I'm seeing more underreactions than anything this week, and that's really surprised me. As you mentioned, this is typically the annual week known as overreaction week across the league, but a game like Seattle at San Francisco really caught my attention, and that has come down off of the 10. I'm seeing 9.5 pretty much painted across the board right now. So even at 9.5, most of the lead up to this game prior to the Niners playing Sunday and the Seahawks playing Monday, this point spread was available at San Francisco -9. San Francisco loses as a heavy favorite. They got up to as much as a touchdown against Chicago. Seattle wins outright as a heavy underdog. They were getting as much as 7 points against Denver leading up to that game. And yet, not only have we seen no adjustment from the market, we've almost seen the line move the other way. So I understand why an astute handicapper would take the Niners loss and especially that Seahawks win with a hefty grain of salt. But ultimately in betting, it all comes down to the number. I feel like maybe 5 years ago, this would have reopened San Francisco -7 or so. And then maybe we want to lay the points with the Niners. When Seattle won on Monday night after the Nathaniel Hackett debacle that Rob has put on his Mount Rushmore of coaching blunders in the history of sports, my knee-jerk reaction was to look for a way to get down on San Francisco. And then yesterday, this line got as high as 10. I couldn't help myself getting a little Seattle in pocket. So it all just comes down to the number. And I feel like based on some week one results, if anything, we might be seeing some underreactions for a change.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, yeah, it is painted 9.5 right here. You can see on the DraftKings board, total 41.5. But Rob, I have to ask you, what was the look ahead line before week one on this? I would have thought that San Fran was over the 10 on the look ahead.
I can quickly pull that up. I will say, I don't put much stock into what the look aheads are. And I think when a lot of people are discussing week two or future weeks in the season, they'll always talk about overreactions or underreactions, and they'll always compare it to the look ahead line. I think what a lot of people need to understand with the look ahead line is those are very small limits that very few people are actually betting into. So I don't think it's really an accurate reflector of what the market was a week prior, which is why I don't look at them all too often. For this week in particular, advanced line, I think at the Westgate was -9 on San Fran over Seattle. I mean, people are always like, is it an overreaction? Is it an underreaction? I do things in a very different way where I just kind of make my line on the game, compare it to the book. I really don't care what people are reacting to or whether people were swayed by a specific performance. For me, it's ultimately myself against everyone else in the market looking at those numbers. So it's hard for me to say this week whether we're seeing some overreactions, underreactions. I think it's actually a pretty decent mix of both.
If I can jump back in for just a moment, a follow-up to Rob's point about look-aheads, I think that's an astute point about not putting too much stock in them. I do wonder if we're just looking at week one, week two, where even for week two, a lot of these numbers were available for a good chunk of the summer. So there was more access to them than say like week 8, looking at the week 7 look ahead line. When we are looking at numbers that, yes, the limits were still low, but they were more accessible for a longer period of time, might those early season look aheads hold any more weight than what we would see later in the season with look ahead lines?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you called this one out great because this is an underreaction to what I guess you would have expected from the line makers and the general public, especially in softer type of sports. NFL is a very sharp sport, and the lines are pretty close to where they should be. But you would have thought that this should be 7.5. Maybe even 7 minus 120 or something. I mean, like just by watching it, right? But those might have been the old days too, and so this might be an underreaction in your point, Matt. So good stuff.
And I
The
get
one
the
that,
teaser protection at 8.5 to 7.5.
Right.
The Niners are going to be everybody's favorite teaser of the week.
Yeah.
So I get 9, but seeing 9.5, 10 for a while, some books even flash 10.5s. That was the point at which I couldn't stay off of Seattle any longer.
Absolutely. Teaser protection sometimes does show value to the dog there. So you have to wonder if that's the case. And sitting at 9.5, very interesting. There's a couple of big spreads here. One overreaction that I kind of have to question here is, well, there's two of them. Dallas, for one, they lose Dak Prescott. They're a very powerful team, but we all had problems with Dallas coming into the season. They didn't play much of their starters in the preseason, which you saw many of these teams that didn't play their starters in the preseason falter a little bit with the Colts and the Bengals. And, we can go on and on. But I just think this thing passing the 7.5 at home, it's at 7.5 most books. I saw an 8, and I did grab an 8. But you have to think that left tackle situation's got to be fixed. I mean, McCarthy is not a good coach by any means, but this line moved drastically. I think more like 9.5 points, Rob, didn't it?
It did. So here's one of the challenges I have, and this is especially why I don't like to look at the look-aheads, because most people who look at this game will say that Dallas was either -1.5 or -2.5 on the look-ahead number against Cincinnati, which is true. Those were the posted lines at sportsbooks a week ago. So a lot of people say, well, this is a huge overreaction because now you're having the spread move, 9 points, 10 points through key numbers of 3 and 7. Personally, if these teams played last week, I would have made Cincinnati a small favorite in Dallas, or at the worst case, a pick 'em. So for me, the move is not as drastic as some people might make it out to be. Then on top of that, you have Dallas lose another offensive lineman last week in Connor McGovern. They already have one of the worst O-lines in the league outside of Zach Martin. Lose another starter. That's a big issue for them. Michael Gallup not expected to be back in the lineup for them this week, so they're still very thin at receiver. Now you have the downgrade from Dak Prescott to Cooper Rush. And I think instantaneously, in my opinion, Dallas becomes a bottom 3 team in the league. At the very least, a bottom 5 team in the league. Cincinnati, very misleading performance, in my opinion, in the sense that they had a -5 turnover margin and they still forced an overtime game, which is extremely challenging to do. On top of that, you can argue they should have won the game in regulation. Jamar Chase did catch a touchdown at the end of the game. They did not rule it a touchdown on the field. Cincinnati didn't challenge, but ultimately, this is going to be one of those games this week where everyone is on the Cincinnati side. It will be talked about as being a heavily public side, and a lot of the commentary leading up to game time will be how the sports books need Dallas to cover. Personally, I could not bet Dallas this week. Even at the current number, I would still only bet the Bengals. I just think that the Cowboys are so limited now in what they can do offensively. Even if the defense shows up and has a performance like they did against the Bucs last week, I struggle to see the offense being able to move the ball consistently. So I still think the price is a little bit short for Cincinnati. I wouldn't rush to bet it right now, but I don't think that this one is like, we're going to see a lot of trends here about week 1 teams getting blown out, losing by double digits, how they respond against the spread in week 2. I just don't put a whole lot of stock into that.
And I think that if we look at this game right now, 7.5 or 8, if you want to get down on the Bengals, again, there's a pretty solid teaser like for you to consider.
Right.
And Rob, I would like to maybe play devil's advocate a bit, not push back too much, because if I'm ever going head to head with you, then I am a hefty underdog. But when I think about this matchup, as bad as Dallas looked, Joe Burrow took 7 sacks week 1. The revamped offensive line, not promising returns early on. And we've seen over the years, sacks becoming a bit more of a quarterback stat. So even with better pieces in front of him, is the problem with Burrow, especially with a guy like Micah Parsons. Dallas does have a good pass rush, if nothing else, to hang its hat on. And then with a coach like Zach Taylor, I know that he's probably not going to be outclassed by Mike McCarthy, but when it comes to needing a guy like Zach Taylor to get a margin against a strong pass rush, how much do you factor those topics into your handicap?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all numbers driven. So all of that would already be accounted for. It's obviously a concern. I think one other thing, like if I was making the case in favor of Dallas, historically speaking, we don't see teams tend to just correct their turnover problem in a week. Teams that turn the ball over 3+ times in games, that tends to be predictive of turnovers in the following week as well. So it's not like Cincinnati's just going to magically keep things clean. I do think that Burrow will come under some pressure in this game, but ultimately it just comes down to the fact that I cannot see Dallas moving the ball consistently. They'll try a heavy dosage of the running game behind an O-line that's not very good right now. Cincinnati's front seven is better on defense than it was a year ago. I just really struggle to see the path to success for Dallas unless they can replicate a similar type of turnover margin that the Steelers did last week. Maybe not +5, but a +2, +3 type of situation to come within the number.
Yeah, that offensive line was horrible. It almost seemed too easy for Tampa, and that was one of the most boring Sunday night games that you can expect when you're supposed to be a good one, and then you're turning off the TV and watching House of Dragon or something else by the time.
Exactly. Yep. I'm a Cowboys fan, and I considered that. So.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
The Skrill Cowboys fan. Well, that's awesome. Well, let's get into some games then. Let's start out with the Thursday night one, and you know who I'm going to first for this one. LA Chargers versus the Kansas City Chiefs. This line's been crawling up a little bit. Obviously, the Chargers have a little bit of injury woes, obviously, with their main wide receiver in Keenan Allen, but the Kansas City Chiefs come out and really took care of business in Arizona. That game wasn't close at all, and Mahomes was just spreading the ball out, doing whatever he wanted. No pass rush, really. We have a high total still, 54.5, -4.5. Maddie, you know I'm going to you, and you're a Chargers fan, so you can admit if you're biased or not, but I'm really excited to hear what you have for this game.
For sure. So I try to remain as objective as possible, and some weeks I'll bet on the Chargers, other weeks I'll bet against them. At the current number, seeing Kansas City, now that they've taken on some steam, yeah, okay, it's so down to some -4s out there. It was 4.5 or 5 earlier. I don't know if maybe there was any promising news about J.C. Jackson. He's the other key piece that has been iffy for the Chargers for this one. And right now, I feel like this spread reminds me of an adage from the late, great David Malinsky. He'd look at a game like this and perhaps think lay 3, take 7. In between, it's a bit of no man's land. Those who got -3 on the Chiefs when this line reopened were astute to do so. It would take a bit more than 4 to get my interest in the Chargers without Keenan Allen, as good as Kansas City looked in week 1. And from a coaching standpoint, I was intrigued by a couple of things I saw from the Chargers in their week 1 win over the Raiders. Even though they won and covered, Brandon Staley uncharacteristically punted in the middle of the game on 4th and 1 from midfield. And I feel like maybe he saw some matchups and just figured, play it safe. This is the Raiders. We've got some edges. We're going to be fine. I feel like going into a better team against the Chiefs and their home stadium, he's going to need to get back to his ways of embracing variance. The Chargers are probably going to need some positive variance to win this game. And offensively, Joe Lombardi, pretty much a punching bag for the analytics crowd. He did admit in a press conference after the game that he got too conservative down the stretch. So I'm glad to hear that he's aware of it. I do want to see him actually enact some changes and put Justin Herbert to proper use and stop babying that offense before I really get too gung-ho on the Chargers. So from a betting standpoint, those are some things I'm thinking about. Nothing at the current spread or total for me, but with a total this high, one of my signature props for those who have listened to Props and Hops over the past couple of years, we're looking at a total right now, 54.5. And I'm liking the price point at certain books, hanging odds on shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards. I'm seeing as good as -125 at some offshores. And the regulated market last week, when this prop became available, I was seeing for totals in this range in week 1, about -150. And I'd be good up to that price point. Part of it's a pure math play. A high total bodes well for the odds of more touchdowns. More touchdowns naturally bodes well for the odds of at least one of those taking place from the 1 yard line. And I know that a 1 yard touchdown can sound really specific to a lot of casual fans. It might sound like you need to thread the needle to get this one home. Why would you lay a substantial amount of vig? And from a math standpoint, it kind of checks out. But when I look at both of these teams, it also checks out. Kansas City, a couple years ago, coming off their Super Bowl win, was my kryptonite for this bet because they had a great offense. They were involved in a lot of games with high totals, but they had just drafted CEH. They didn't have a great offensive line. So it seemed like every time they got down near the goal line, they were getting stonewalled. Last year, they addressed that issue. They fortified the O-line. They got a lot more creative with their play calling in short yardage situations. Kansas City with multiple 1-yard scores in week 1. And I don't think that's an isolated incident. I think it's building on a lot of progress they showed throughout the course of 2021. And then even the Chargers, at least now with Staley and Lombardi, it's not the Anthony Lynn ways of just flexing your muscles and trying to run into a brick wall at the 1. Justin Herbert passing for a touchdown from the 1 last week. And even in some key short yardage situations, including to ice the game, running the ball on the right side of their line behind Zion Johnson and Trey Pipkins. Running to the right was not something they could bank on doing last year. So with some more short yardage opportunities for the Chargers to keep defenses honest, I like either team's odds of getting a 1-yard touchdown in this game, even if we don't happen to see something like PI in the end zone.
Well, that's a sharp prop in my opinion, because you do have a high total, and this is the pass interference league. Yeah, you know what happens when there's pass interference in the end zone, and these two high-flying teams. Very, very possible that's going to happen. So very great angle on it. Love it. Rob, what are your thoughts on this one?
I completely misread the market on this one. So when I saw the 3.5, I thought it was more likely to go towards the Chargers. And I was be looking to back the Chiefs at -3. It obviously went the other way pretty quickly this week, created a no bet situation for me. I do have some concerns with the Chargers going forwards. Fabian Sommer wrote this in the week 1 takeaways article over at TheHammer.it. But how the Chargers have been consistently underperforming their EPA numbers. And when you look at last week against the Raiders, you had Justin Herbert, a much higher EPA than Derek Carr, 0.46, EPA per play higher than Derek Carr. They finished with a +3 turnover margin. They were not able to separate. They only won that game by 5 points, came down to the wire, or at least was a close game towards the end. This has kind of been a habit for them going backwards, excuse me. So I'm not sure on the Chargers just yet. I love the personnel. I think Brandon Staley is a good coach, but for some reason or another, over the course of the last year and now 1 game, they've just not been getting the results to match the metrics on paper. It's kind of like the opposite of what the Patriots were for so many years, where their advanced metrics were not that great, but they continuously pulled out wins and were winning Super Bowls and so on and so forth. So I think the market's kind of settled in a good spot here, very accurate. Wish I would have been able to get a Chiefs bet earlier in the week. That's kind of past now. So it's kind of a no play for me here in no man's land.
No, it makes sense. And it was an interesting market because I think the injury, maybe with J.C. Jackson, even brought that line up a little bit. So that's very interesting. You know, I was on the Raiders +4 last week, and I thought it was a bad bet when I was watching the game, but I was surprised to be in the game. You know, you have 3 turnovers, and the Chargers have none, and you're still in this game. And you're right, Matt. It's just about how he wasn't aggressive, and that's how you lose games. I used to call prevent defense, prevent the win. You know, as a Bears fan, oh great, they're going into cover 2, prevent the win. You know, that's what we used to always say, and it drove me nuts. But I think you can't take your foot off the gas pedal until you are up multiple scores, and we'll see if Lombardi does make that change. My number is KC -4. And I was impressed last week, but it was still a lot about the Cardinals and their issues too. So I think it's a pretty good line as well. Let's move on to the next game. Washington Commanders. Still weird seeing the Commanders, by the way, versus the Detroit Lions. This is a -1.5. The total is 49.5. And I just want to tell you guys before I get into your analysis, this line kind of felt like a trick. This line almost tricked me a little bit in a way. You know, at first I'm thinking the Lions, you know, they got all that heart and Dan Campbell and, you know, and then Washington, you know, should have kind of lost to the Jaguars in many cases. But then I kind of think back and I'm like, this is the Lions in a different situation. It's not their backs against the wall. They're favorites. They're coming in as favorites in this game. And I'm not a trends guy by any means, but there is a different mindset to teams when you are a favorite or when you're the underdog. And I kind of think about that. And I also think about their quarterback. And now the Commanders and Carson Wentz, I wasn't high on this year. I think I had them around 7 wins. But what I will say is I'm a little bit impressed by the receivers, Samuel, Dotson, and they didn't even use McLaurin really yet. You know, I was a little bit impressed by that. So, you know, when I made my number, I'm at -1.5. I'm literally right on it. I think it's close to a coin flip game. So that's my thoughts. Rob, why don't you go first?
I make Washington a small favorite in the game, and probably will make that a bigger favorite by game time if these injury reports, or at least the early injuries for Detroit, end up sticking around for the majority of the week. So we're looking at today, their left tackle Taylor Decker did not practice. Their center Frank Ragnow did not practice. Right guard Tommy Kramer did not practice. DeAndre Swift did not practice for the team. So none of those guys gave it a go today. That'll be interested to see going forwards, because to me, the only strength of the Lions team this year is their offensive line. With that said, Philadelphia, who played them last week, had the best pass rush win rate in the entire league last week, which is why Detroit struggled to move until they got into garbage time later on in the game. So I'm just not fond of the Lions. I don't really understand the love. Part of it, I think, is the Hard Knocks effect. They have a below-average quarterback. They have a below-average defense. If they have the offensive line injuries this week, I don't see where they're better at any positional group than Washington going into this week. I'm not high on the Commanders. I think they're very average to below-average football team. Agreed entirely that they could have lost to Jacksonville last week if the Jags didn't have some self-inflicted mistakes. But to me, the Lions are just still way overvalued by market. They get the cover last week. A lot of people are going to remember that. They'll come back to the window to bet them again this week. We just got to remember that the Lions are consistently getting smoked in all these games that they play. They find a way to make it close at the end when it's garbage time, but for the majority of the game, they're essentially playing from behind, and they're getting a lot of prevent defenses that end up, really making their numbers look a lot more flattering than they actually are. So I like Washington on the money line in this game. I've already played it, already filled that position. Any injuries to the Detroit offensive line would be an added bonus to me. I'm on the Commanders this week.
Oh, okay. Interesting stuff on the Commanders. Matt, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that Rob put it pretty well, so I'll be a little bit short here. These are two teams that I'm not eager to back, and when I see the opportunity with this line, -2, -1.5 some spots, especially with one market-making offshore book already down to -1 for Detroit, while Washington's in teaser territory, I'm taking them up through the 3 and the 7. I just feel like there's a cap as to how much Detroit can run away from just about anybody. To Rob's point, they're really good in garbage time. I don't expect there to be much garbage time in this game. I expect a pretty competitive matchup one way or the other. So Washington, one of my favorite teaser legs of the week. I took an early lead on Washington teased with Pittsburgh. But if you also like a team like Carolina teasing up or Cincinnati teasing down this week, no shortage of good options to pair with the Commanders in a teaser.
On a side note, there's a group that hit the over this week, Rob. Wasn't there on this game?
Yeah, it was a Monday morning move. I think that would probably be the Warren Sharp MO if I had to guess, but definitely a Monday morning move towards the over. Saw another move towards the over yesterday, and then seen some buyback towards the under today. I think that's related to the O-line injuries, DeAndre Swift not practicing for Detroit, somebody trying to get out ahead of that number. Candidly speaking, at the end of last week, I wanted an over in this game between Washington and Detroit. Thought it would open up in the range that it did. Now where it's at right now, I think it's slightly too high with the potential of Detroit missing, some key offensive linemen there. So I think it's one of those situations where it's probably moved a little bit too much. Am I eager to jump in on the under? Probably not.
All right, good stuff. Let's move on to the next game. Carolina versus the New York Giants. I'm just giving you guys the best games, all right? You get the Lions, you got the Panthers. Oh, geez. When it comes to sports betting, it shouldn't matter. I have a play on this game, and so I'm going to let you guys go first to see where we line up. Rob, why don't you start on Carolina versus the New York Giants? I wrote 2.5, but I see it down to 2 now. Total 42.5. Let's go by -2 with a total of 42.5.
I'm at a pick 'em for this game. Probably I would, if I had to guess, lower on the Giants than everyone else in market. Good win for them last week. Obviously trailed for the majority of the game. They were able to come from behind. I still think that this is going to be an offense that really struggles and is going to be one-dimensional for a large majority of the year. Now, Carolina's not great at stopping the run. They did get shredded on the ground last week by Cleveland, but I do think that they are going to key in on the run against New York and force Daniel Jones to beat them. I just don't think Daniel Jones is capable. We saw 2 big mistakes from him last week. One was a blindside hit that turned into a fumble. The other was an interception in the red zone. I think he's still too much of a mistake-prone quarterback to trust him in some type of favorite role, even if it's only laying a few points. On the other side of things, I think Carolina might get a break here. We're going to see if the Giants' pass rushers are back this week. Obviously, Kayvon Thibodeau didn't play last week. A couple of outside linebackers for them injured going into this week, and we'll see. I believe they were both got in a limited practice today, but that should take a lot of pressure off of Baker Mayfield. I mean, last week we look at the big matchup advantage that the Browns had against the Panthers with their edge rush on the outside, Ike Ekwonu on the left side going up against Myles Garrett. It's a lot easier when he doesn't have to face Myles Garrett. I do think that Baker Mayfield will be able to move the ball a little bit more. The Giants also missing one of their starting cornerbacks in Aaron Robinson. He had an emergency appendectomy yesterday as well, so he's out this week. I think that factors into the equation as well because I think Carolina's wide receivers match up nicely against this Giants secondary. So it's a Panthers or nothing type of game. Probably would play them on the money line rather than taking the 2 points. That's just how I prefer to play them, although both, you can make an argument for both. But I do think that the Giants are a little bit of a fraud.
All right, Matt, do you agree with some of the stuff that Rob said?
Yeah, it's tough to disagree with any of that. My play is a look at Carolina in a teaser, naturally, and I don't mean to make it too robotic. Oh, it's a 2-point underdog, of course, cross through the 3 and 7. Yes, that's naturally where my eyes are drawn first, just about any time we have an underdog in this range. But specifically with this matchup, I feel like 2 plays that we saw that both teams had very little control over last week could have flipped the favorite for the game this week. The Giants winning because Tennessee misses a field goal from inside of 50 yards on the final play of the game, and then Carolina losing because the Browns' new kicker bangs one in from 58. That looked like it could have been good from 68. So 2 special teams plays with a lot of variance. I feel like if Cleveland misses from 58, Tennessee converts from inside of 50. The Panthers are the 1-0 team. The Giants are the 0-1 team. And we could very well see this line at pick'em, like Rob said, he makes it, or even perhaps Carolina favored. So I feel like teasing this game up, I'm paying for 6 points. And in effect, I feel like I'm getting a decent bit more than that.
Yeah, definitely love the teaser on Carolina's side with this total here. And their teasers hit on both sides of their game against Washington last week. But I'm going to disagree a little bit. And I hate disagreeing with sharp people, but that's what the show's about. We have disagreement. I have a play in the Giants. I took it at 1.5. They moved up to 2.5, but it kind of came back down a little bit, probably with that injury news to their cornerback, like you mentioned there, Rob. I'm playing on the coach here. And what's so funny? All these narratives really got completely destroyed. Like new coach against a well-renowned coach like Belichick, right? Well, Belichick got destroyed last week. So it's funny. Nobody talks about these trends and stuff when it doesn't work out for them. But what I will say is I'm looking at the coaches here, and even though Matt Rule's been a coach for a while, I just don't believe he's an NFL coach, and I think he makes some terrible adjustments. I don't like Carolina's offensive line. I think they're bad. They allowed 4 sacks last weekend, and I know Baker had to try to come back, but a lot of their points were scored in the fourth quarter with a lot of the prevent stuff last week. I think that Carolina's defense is bad, allowing 217 yards on the ground to Nick Chubb. What shocked me about Brian Daboll is I didn't think he was going to use Saquon Barkley so well because of his time at Buffalo. I mean, it's not like people were drafting Devin Singletary on their fantasy leagues, or Moss, right? They weren't. And all of a sudden, they come out for 200 some rushing yards against the top rushing defense all of last year in the Tennessee Titans. So it's like, who did the Titans lose on defense? It makes me kind of question. It's like, how is this so bad? Maybe it's just the week 1 woes, but I think there's a mismatch in the trenches. And I know that, there's definitely some skill on the receivers, just like you pointed out, and they might win some matchups there, but it's still Baker Mayfield throwing. It's still Baker Mayfield coming into an offense that he's quite not used to. And I'm just betting on the coach here. So it might be a coin flip, but I'll take the home team with the coach, and I did lay a couple stars on it, Rob.
Yeah,
so
I mean that's fair. I'm not a Matt Rule fan. I think he made a big mistake firing his OC last year. Ultimately, that is one that I'm willing to admit I'm scared of the coaching matchup in this. But I do think that there's some things that Carolina will take away and learn from last week. Like Christian McCaffrey had 3 touches in the first 25 minutes of the game last week. I don't know the reasoning for that. I'm sure they'll rely on him a lot more, especially you look at the Titans. Dontrell Hilliard was like a great pass catcher in the open field. I can't imagine the Giants are able to cover CMC in the open field this week. So I think there's some valuable takeaways from last week's game. Can Matt Rule implement those? I have no idea if that's the case or not, but certainly I would agree that that would be a concern for anyone backing the Panthers.
All right, well, fair enough. Let's move on to the final game that we're going to talk about, Miami versus Baltimore. Baltimore minus 3.5. The total is 44.5. I'm very close to a play on this, guys. I'm going to see if you can talk me on or off it. Matt, why don't you start first?
All right, you're not going to get too much of a nudge from me one way or the other on this one. I think with Baltimore, if they were still at 3, I'd be inclined to look their way. But I think that at 3.5 with some injuries they suffered last week, lost a left tackle, lost a cornerback. It seems like they just can't escape the injury bug. I still like them a lot. I want to look their way. But with Miami, as much as I am, part of me, I just think maybe the fan in me kind of wants to see Tua struggle a bit because there are so many comparisons to him and Justin Herbert. And I just don't even know why we're comparing them. Like, should we
Here we go.
Yeah, should we be comparing apples and oranges? But at the same time, I know that Tua had a big pedigree, and he seems like somebody who really objectively I would like to see him succeed. I know a lot of the metrics on one hand can make it out to be that he can't throw downfield and he just really leaves a lot to be desired. On the other hand, this year with a more offensive-minded coach, of course, with Tyreek Hill, some fortification along the offensive line, I don't know that he's going to make a lot of throws that will wow people on video, but I think he can be effective enough within the framework of this offense. So it's just a team where the jury's really out for me. I don't have the best read yet on Miami. Baltimore with their injuries, I'm pumping the brakes just a little bit. So I kind of feel like this number is in the right place right now.
All right, Rob, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm in a similar spot here. I think it's just very difficult to lay the points with the Ravens due to the injuries that Matt mentioned. And obviously they're still missing Marcus Peters as well. So that essentially leaves them with Marlon Humphrey in the secondary against a pretty talented group of receivers for the Dolphins. Now, ultimately, the quarterback has to get them the ball. They only scored 20 points last week. From an EPA and success rate on offense, they were much better than a 20-point output, but they only ended up putting up 20 points. Part of that was just Tua made some bad throws along the way. And I think that this offense has a ton of upside if Tua can just hang in the pocket. But the second he kind of has to move his feet, you see the inaccuracy, you see them struggle a little bit. So I kind of just don't want a piece of either team right now. If Baltimore was fully healthy, I'd certainly be considering them here, but no idea if Ronnie Stanley's going to be back at left tackle. That's a major concern. Obviously because they'd be down to a third string left tackle there with Jawan James being out of the lineup as well. So it's kind of a game that really hasn't been on my radar this week in terms of side or total.
One more thing to add, if I may, Kev, then we'll hear where you're leaning. Last year in primetime, Miami just blitzed the brains out of the Ravens, and there was no adjustment in game. And now I've got to think that Baltimore is going to be better prepared for that. If they've got some injuries up front, it might limit their ability to combat the Dolphins blitz. But that's another area where I feel like we can watch and learn a lot from this. It's one of the marquee matchups of the whole week, and we're getting in the early window on Sunday. So very interested in watching this game, just not sure where there might be value betting it at this stage.
I'm really glad he brought that up, Matt, because that was the first thing that came to my mind was how Harbaugh got out coached by Flores last year in that game. It was tons of blitzes. It was a lot of press coverage and stuff like that. And I was shocked to see it. But, you have to also say that Baltimore had massive injuries. But so far this year, like Rob pointed out, it's like they're kind of going right back into the injury bug here. This line really bugs me. It bothers me. Both of these teams, I thought, underperformed last week. I thought the Jets were just so bad on the offense. I just thought that there should have been a little bit more of a blowout. I mean, the Jets did outgain them. Now, a lot of that was garbage, but it was still a lot. There's still a lot of yards there. And the Ravens' defense is kind of suspect to me. And the Kyle Fuller injury is bad, especially when you have guys like Jalen Waddle right there. It's two amazing receivers. Tyreek Hill and Waddle could be the best dynamic duo this year. You don't know. And just we'll see how good Tua is. We'll see how good McDaniel is too, because, Shanahan really touted him. And I wasn't sure what to believe. I came in kind of like a little bit down on Miami. I'm still a little bit down on them, but I'm a little bit more down on Baltimore too. It almost feels like that with an offense like Miami, if Tua just pulls it together, they can backdoor this at any moment. Juwan James, tearing his Achilles. That is not good. Here's Ronnie Stanley might be back. Ronnie Stanley, which I think was in 2019 a Pro Bowler for the Ravens, and he should fit in at left tackle. But the dude hasn't played in 28 games, so it's like he could be rusty. So I'm gonna give you a strong. I'm gonna lean to the Dolphins, and I'm gonna think more about this and keep watching the reports. So that's where I was close. I was close to the Dolphins, but you guys didn't have a side. But before we go, are there any games or plays that you guys want to give out on this show? We'll start out with you, Rob, before we say goodbye.
So far, we've talked about 2 games where we've covered my bets. I mentioned that I played the Bengals as well. So I think those are the 3 bets I've made so far this week, which are Panthers, Commanders, and Bengals. So nothing else so far on my radar. I mean, obviously I have some buy points for some specific teams. Don't know that I can stomach the Titans against the Bills on Monday Night Football as much as that line is now calling my name. Not sure I want to have a ticket against Buffalo. That's pretty much what's been on my radar. So I'll throw it over to Matt, but nothing else immediately stands out to me.
Sure. And similarly, between a lot of the teasers, the Thursday night prop, the Seattle number that's no longer available. So we don't need to belabor the point there. If it does tick back up to 10, then I would take the points with the Seahawks. One other prop, if I may, bringing the props and hops element into this as we wrap up. A game we haven't touched on yet, but Arizona at Las Vegas. I'm waiting to see where Kyler Murray's rushing yardage prop opens up. Last week, I played him over 32.5. It ended up closing in the mid-30s, and it was a loser. He settled in at 29 yards, but he got to 29 yards pretty quickly, and I think he was a victim of game script. Once the Chiefs were so in charge of that game for pretty much the entire second half, why bother exposing him to any injury risk? And early in the season, I feel like if a lot of these props are posted using, career averages, just looking at number of games played, number of rushing yards, early in the season, we tend to see a healthier Kyler Murray because with his size and stature, it's been tough for him to hold up over the course of 17, now 18 weeks. Week 2, still healthy by all accounts. I expect a more competitive matchup. So if he's at 29 yards early in the second half, I don't think he's going to stop short of the mid-30s this time around. I know the Raiders have taken some steam, but I just expect a more competitive matchup than the Cardinals gave the Chiefs last week. And also with the Raiders pass rush with guys like Max Crosby and Chandler Jones. If they can get Murray off his spot, he's fully capable of fighting fire with fire. So if we see Murray open in the range of 34.5, 35.5, then I'd look to play his rushing yardage prop over.
All right, good stuff. I love it. That's just another almost overreaction, seeing how bad the Cardinals fell. That point spread really took off on them. And do the Raiders have a home field advantage there? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't give them much, maybe a half a point or something like that. So that's interesting. And that game's really interesting to me. And so I'm going to be watching, see if J.J. Watt's going to play and a couple other guys, coming into this game before I make more decisions. I guess I got lucky, Rob, picking like a lot of the games that you're on. So how about that, man? Just
I saw the script. I saw the script beforehand with the games. I'm like, perfect. This guy picked the ones I wanted to talk about anyways.
Awesome. I'm going to give one quick play, and I'm taking the first half under for Buffalo versus the Tennessee Titans. It's at 26 in some books. It's kind of creeped down to 25.5, and I luckily grabbed it at 26. It's a 49.5 total the last time I looked. And the way I look at it is like, well, Buffalo, their defense was way better than I thought. And, was it a lot of Matt Stafford? Those guys were covered when they went and played that game at LA. I think it was a fantastic defensive performance. But at the same time, the Tennessee Titans, they're that team last year that really just got up for the big games. They beat a lot of the top teams, almost all the top teams last year. And then they faltered against the bad ones. I think they fixed their rushing defense a little bit. And I do think that Buffalo's going to eventually get their points. But this is their second road game in a row. And I believe that Tennessee is going to at least have the defense enough to stop them in the beginning, because these teams have kind of faced each other every single year. So I think 26 is a little bit too much, and I kind of like it down to 24.5. So that's my thoughts for a first half play. Sometimes you got to jump in the derivatives. Any comments before we go?
I mean, credit to you. You have some serious balls with any Bills unders. I will say, I mean, great defensive game plan from them against the Rams. They did not blitz a single time in that game. If you look at Matt Stafford historically, he's very good against the blitz. He's very bad when there's no blitz. So he just could not find the open receivers. Buffalo played a ton of coverage, and they were able to get home against the bad offensive line and really generate a bunch of pressure there. Interesting to see what the game plan will be against Tennessee, but it's very obvious to me that Bills team is extremely well coached. You just don't see teams come into a game plan where they say, we're never going to blitz, or we're always going to blitz, or whatever. And we're starting to see more of it nowadays, but that to me was just an A-plus game plan. If they put together a game plan that is, catered to taking, the strength of the Tennessee Titans out of the game, which would probably be their running game, I could totally see that. But man, that Bills offense is scary when they get going. They 31-10, 21-point win is extremely misleading. Because they just absolutely shellacked the Rams last week.
And I said that wrong. The Bills are at home, but that almost makes me like it more. This could be like a goose egg type situations if that defense shows up. So I see a couple different ways it can hit. Well, guys, thank you so much for your great information. Really enjoyed having you both on. Where can our listeners get your great information in media, starting with you, Matt?
Sure. So I would encourage anybody listening, if they've enjoyed this conversation, to check out TheHammer.bet. Follow us on Twitter at TheHammer.HQ. And I've moved over my podcast, Props and Hops, to the Hammer Betting Network. So new this season, going twice a week with Props and Hops. One show on Wednesday, I'm about to hop on and record with pro bettor Fabian Summer. We're calling it Between the Lines. It is within the Props and Hops family, so people can still get it on the Props and Hops YouTube channel as well as the podcast feed. But we're basically looking at the biggest NFL line moves from the books that take the biggest bets and getting inside the mind of a pro bettor when it comes to reading the market. So those are fascinating conversations with Fabian, who goes by Suma on gambling Twitter. And then Friday's the flagship show, really focusing on the props this year. Another co-host, pro bettor Hitman, who knows props about as well as anybody that I've ever come across. So if nothing else, just tune in for great insights from Suma on Wednesdays and Hitman on Fridays on Props and Hops.
Wonderful stuff for sure. Rob, where can our listeners get your great information?
Absolutely. Same thing. Hammer.bet. I host primetime lead-in shows on Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football, as well as a halftime program where we break down the second half of those games. I do have a podcast that comes out on Monday mornings called Forward Progress, where I recap the entire week of the NFL. I look ahead to the following week as well and kind of try to guess where the lines are going to move. And then Sunday mornings, which is kind of, my big show or the flagship show, 11 a.m. Eastern time. You can check me out. I go live. I preview every single game on the Sunday board, top to bottom, rotation number order. So you can check that out at The Hammer. And also for those looking for a line shopping tool or to track their bets, obviously download BetStamp, or you can check out the site betstamp.app.
Awesome. Make sure you guys check out Rob and Matt. Guys, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.